My name is Rabbi Jarrod Grover. For those of you who I haven't met on the call, I'm the senior rabbi at Beth Tikvah Synagogue in Toronto. I'm so pleased to welcome David Hazony virtually to Beth Tikvah. He is an award-winning editor, translator, and author, and was originally here to plug a wonderful new work, a real gift, a compendium of thoughts on priorities for the Jewish people called, aptly, Jewish Priorities, 65 Proposals for the Future of Our People. And the book is coming out, I think, in a few weeks, if I'm
It's
correct.
out.
Or is it? Oh, it's out. Okay,
It's
great.
out. Yeah.
It's out very recently, however, like
Last week,
last
October
week. Okay.
24th. Yeah.
Okay. So very recently available to you all to purchase on Amazon. It is a compendium of essays from Jewish leaders from across the Jewish world. I read it last weekend on a flight to Los Angeles, and it was great. Um, Easy chapters from people who you like and people who you hate, and you'll feel all sorts of different emotions throughout the book that really bring you the joy and this challenges of the diverse Jewish people that we are. He is the former editor in chief of the journal Azure and was the founding editor of the Tower.org. His book, The Ten Commandments, was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. His translation of Uri Bar Joseph's The Angel was a winner of the National Jewish Book Award. He's a PhD in Jewish philosophy from the Hebrew University and lives in Jerusalem. He is currently joining us from New York. David, welcome. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us.
Thank you
Now,
so much, Rabbi
as
Grover.
I said, we were originally going to talk about your book. We have a lot more to talk about tonight. So you're speaking to an audience of Canadian Jews who are watching with heavy, heavy hearts as the people of Israel cope with a tragedy the likes of which we haven't seen in many, many, many years. And I want you to know that many people in this community are intimately affected by the events in Israel. We have congregants who have family who were kidnapped, family who have congregants who have family who were murdered. So this is a very, very personal kind of assault that we experienced in Toronto, although not as much as it's felt in Israel. And I guess your wisdom would be really, really helpful tonight. A lot of us don't know what to do with all of the emotions that we're feeling, and I feel like if you've gained anything from the publication or the editing of this book, it is a really important advice and guidance for this moment on how the challenges of the Jewish world sort of boil down in many ways to this moment and what we should do when Jewish peoplehood is felt very deeply by all of us. So your wisdom, we need your wisdom, we need your guidance, we
Thank
need
you.
your direction. Give us some perspective.
So, thank you again, and thank you to all of you for joining the call. Um, Obviously, this wasn't the original intention of the purpose of the call, and let me just begin by saying that we're all going through a trauma. You have all these energies and emotions, you're not sure what to do. What you're doing is processing a very, very traumatic moment in all of our lives. And every individual deals with it and faces it differently. And certainly the communities in North America versus Israel are experiencing it a little bit differently. Um, on the one hand, Israelis are obviously bearing the brunt of the direct trauma. I know not one, but 4 or 5 different paths through which my family and friends are, one degree of separation removed from the horror. And it's not just me who knows 4 or 5 different strands of that. Like every Israeli I know can name 4 or 5 people that were either killed or or abducted or horribly injured that they know personally or know someone who knows personally. So we're in an absolutely insane moment, and and at the same time, there are ways that the North American Jewish community is having a harder time of it. There are things that you're facing that we're not. We had a launch event in Philadelphia this past Sunday, a full day event with 25 speakers, including 5 or 6 others besides me who had just come from Israel. And the word that I heard more than any other was loneliness, fear and loneliness. And, with everything Israelis are going through, the one thing we're not feeling is lonely.
Interesting.
There is a sense that everybody's gone through it together and everybody's mobilizing together and everybody's going to hit back hard together. And do you
feel that sense of partnership and togetherness also with diaspora Jewry? That is, I know why you're saying in Israel that you don't feel lonely. You have your neighbors,
right.
You have the whole country rallying together, but do you feel diaspora Jewry rallying behind you as well?
Look, we see what the diaspora Jewry is going through, because we see the protests and we see the sudden support for Hamas in all sorts of places you didn't want to see it, and we do feel that support. The more blatant support, the more striking support we feel is in the presence of 2 aircraft carriers in the pool out back.
Right.
The support of the U.S. administration and many governments, including quite a few European governments, has been very strong and very clear and there's tremendous gratitude. And certainly we also feel the support of our fellow Jews, but we also understand that they're going through something as well, and it's not just only our tragedy. I have to say that getting on the plane to the United States was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Okay, it was 2 solid weeks of holding it in, because when you're in the middle of trauma and tragedy, there's still stuff that needs to get done. And when you have the schools suddenly closed, then you have kids to take care of. And when you have, when you work in a high-tech company where half the employees have suddenly been called up, the other half has an awful lot of work to do. And there really isn't any time to properly console the bereaved or to properly grieve or to properly do anything, because you're just too busy. That's in the first initial phase of it. And you can't imagine the sort of powerful sense of guilt you feel just getting on a plane leaving at that time. But I do have to say, in terms of Israeli wisdom right now, there is something that is very important for me to say, which is that I got to America, I got to the hotel, and I was just totally disoriented and barely thought I was in a dream, and realized it wasn't a dream because I could not have invented pumpkin flavored croissants in the hotel lobby. So that's how I know I was really in America. But I got to the hotel room and I'm looking at all the stories that apparently are flooding not only Israeli television, but also North American television and all 3 of the big cable networks, and all the stories of horror and despair and tragedy. And the one thing I noticed was that there was a certain kind of story that was actually missing, that we Israelis had been hearing since the first day, which is stories of heroism. Mm-hmm. We're getting, I would say, 30% of the TV news stories about the horror that you're seeing in Israel are actually stories of heroism, of this, ordinary person who got in their pickup truck and drove into the party to pull people out and lead them to safety, and then went back in again over and over multiple times. The story of the grandfather who heard that his children and grandchildren were stuck in a house in the South that was under attack, and got a gun and a bunch of friends with guns and just went down and freed them. There's
so you don't think those stories are getting sufficient play on
I've seen them very, very little.
What's that about? What's that about? People
Oh,
love dead Jews.
I I think it's part of it, and I think part of it is that the kind of stories that people feel. I think this is being driven by our side to some degree, which is to say we're pushing those stories out because there's a sense that it's the sympathy that is crucial for support.
Right.
But for us Israelis internally, psychologically, we also need to see the stories of heroism
Right.
because our whole country was founded as a response to the pogroms, as a response to the Holocaust, as a response to centuries of feeling of helplessness in the face of the inhumanity and barbarism. And we can't accept a purely victim narrative. And this goes back all the way to the early years of the country when they created Holocaust Remembrance Day. The name for the day in Hebrew is Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura, the Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust and heroism. Okay, and every Holocaust Day ceremony in Israel includes recognition of the ghetto uprisings and the people who fought back in any way they could. And I know that many North American Jews have long seen Israel as having this sort of false machismo, and why can't you just let the Holocaust be the Holocaust? But in moments like this, it's just incredibly important. And I would say even further, I saw an amazing interview with four commanders. This is a week into the war, and they had an interview on TV on Channel 12 of four commanders of the Egoz Special Forces Unit. And these are top ground forces, and they have their faces covered except for their eyes. And you can see in their eyes a powerful determination. And it's, and they're saying, we heard the call, we heard gunfire and explosions. We ran in, we saw our commanding officer lying on a stretcher. He'd already been taken out of action and was being treated medically. We had to step over him in order to keep going forward because our most important goal was that if the terrorists were to encounter anyone, it would be us and not civilians.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes on to say that when he looks around at all the burnt out kibbutzim, one of the commanding officers, he says, what I see these kibbutzim not only rebuilt and repopulated, but flourishing and growing beyond anything they've ever been before. So we Israelis, the parents, right? Yes. We take a tremendous amount of inspiration from our kids who are in uniform and from this whole young generation that has come together with the grown-ups, forgotten all of the judicial reform and all the, everything is just gone. And the only thing that we're focused on now is helping each other, mobilizing in every way possible, and preparing to take the fight to the enemy, really. And so I started to ask myself, what would it be like if diaspora Jewry were similarly inspired? What would it be like if the diaspora as a whole worked together and got together and said, this is not, because this is true, what I'm about to say is really true. This is not a war against Israel. This is not about the state of Israel. This is a war on the Jewish people. And the battlefields are all over the place. They're on college campuses. I'm walking in Manhattan and I encounter an Israeli store owner who's trying to stick up the kidnapped poster on her thing because somebody had just torn it down, and I helped her out. In little ways and in big ways, it really is a war. And in a moment of war, what's important is not yet, it's a terrifying moment, and yet what's important is to come together and make a mental switch that says, this is not about just about staying safe. That's important. This is also about how do we take the fight to the enemy? How do we make our enemies, how do we, even allowing ourselves to use the word enemy is such a harsh word that we've taught ourselves not to use it anymore. But today we've discovered there are actual Hamas supporters who really believe that what happened was worth celebrating and who would do the same to us and our children given the license and opportunity. So it doesn't necessarily, I'm not saying everybody's got to buy a gun. That's not my message, though I respect those who do. What I'm saying is that the moment you think about it as a war, it gives you the confidence, sense of togetherness, and above all, creativity to say, okay, what do? We need intel, we need new operations, we need to come up, we need to see who's doing what in different areas, we need to think about legislation, we need to think about legal action, we need to think about what needs to be funded. And the therapeutic aspect of knowing that you can actually mobilize and go to war against your enemies instead of feeling like you're in a pogrom, I think it's absolutely imperative and necessary and helpful to everyone. You mentioned the book, and I have to say,
just before you get into
okay,
the book, do you think, because you just said a lot of very, very interesting things.
Okay.
You got to give me a chance to
okay, I'm sorry.
a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically saying the Jewish people now is got to prepare itself or has to understand that what Hamas declared on October 7th was a war against Jewish people everywhere. Now, I get that Israelis see that. It's their land. It's their children. It's their families. It happened in front of their face. I am not sure that the rest of the Jewish world sees things that way. The rest of the Jewish world that often wants to be loved and accepted by the institutions of American life that we are discovering are poisoned with a certain toxicity that is justifying some of the terrorist acts. I'm not sure that we see things that way, and I want to ask you whether you feel diaspora Jewry is ready to fight the war that they need to fight in the places they live.
So it's a
given the
great
enemy
question
that we're confronting.
Look, it's often said that New York City is a lot like America, in the sense that it's not America.
Yeah.
Something else, but it's similar. I've been now in Philadelphia and New York, and I've given a number of talks and met with a lot of people, and I do feel that what I'm saying resonates. It concretizes something that's deep inside them and stirring, though they haven't found the words to articulate it. And some of the speakers were not from New York. Some of them were from the West Coast. There was a speaker from Minneapolis who sort of in the works at the JCRC of the Twin Cities, and she felt that it was a very powerful, empowering way of looking at things, because the kids on the campuses are feeling it, and a lot of campuses, and the sense of what do we do? We're scared, and to know that there is, before you even say what to do, there's a I even call it a spiritual shift that needs to take place. And I think that if those who are not ready to make that shift are going to be forced to make it later on, because war is upon us.
Right.
It's there, whether
They'll
we like
come
it or
for
not.
you eventually.
And listen, I want to, but to put it in perspective, one of the things that shifting the mindset does is it allows you to keep perspective and proportion of the magnitude of your enemies. Because those institutions you're describing, some of them have been heavily penetrated by enemies, and a lot of them have not, and are allies and are pushing back as well. And we have a lot of allies, but you have to look at it kind of dispassionately and map it out and say, okay, who's really on our side right now, and who's really against us right now? What have we learned? And recognize that we're not alone. B, even if we were alone, the Jewish people working together is an incredibly powerful force, much more powerful than at any previous point in our history. And C, we're not alone. So we have tremendous allies, people who understand that just as Israel neglected Gaza for 20 years and thought it was fine, we've neglected academia for decades and generations and thought everything was fine. And now it's recognized that this is a real problem. And you have donor revolts, okay, which are very powerful potentially against elite universities.
Do you see those catching on?
I think so. I hope so. Every day I see an additional report at a different university of a major donor who says I'm out. And this is happening at Harvard and at Penn and at Cornell, I believe. Really top elite universities that major donors are saying, and this is much more powerful than I'm not going to send my kids to that school.
Mhm.
Like that's also something. But if you understand the fundamental business model on which private universities are built, you realize it's not out of tuition that they're making their money. It's through massive philanthropy.
Mhm.
So, but there are so many other ways, so many other pathways that people can join the battle. And you know, I my kids are in the army, so I feel like I'm contributing to the physical defense of the country. I'm, as you mentioned, in books and editing and so forth, and I'm trying to do some writing, but above all, my weapon is this book. I mean, when I was 100% certain when war came that all the events and the whole launch would be put off, because that's what happens with book launches
Right.
at times of sudden upheaval. I mean, I've heard so many stories of authors who worked for 2 or 5 or 10 years on a book only to have the entire launch wiped away. And I suddenly discovered that every single event wanted to do the event anyway because they felt that it was needed. Um, and that was what gave me strength and the impulse to get on the plane at all, was the sense that this is something needed. It's
So help us
you know
understand that, because we look through the book and say, look, all we don't care about priorities of getting along with each other and tikkun olam. There's no time for that now. As you
yeah.
said, we've got Hamas at our front door, and that's the only priority we want to be interested in now. So help us
Okay.
understand why the
So
book is now more relevant.
so a few things. First of all, the purpose of the book, the original purpose of the book, was not the specific content of the essays, although the essays are very interesting and different and diverse. The purpose of the book was to demonstrate for, for our people the possibility of having this conversation at all, that we are a people, and that we are a people that disagrees on many things, but nonetheless can sit around the same table, right? We are an extended family coming for Thanksgiving dinner, in which that cousin that you hate is there, but he's there and you're there because it's Thanksgiving dinner for the family.
Yes.
That's something we're not used to. We've spent generations now either focused inward in our smaller groups or focused outward beyond the Jewish people. And peoplehood is something that you can't just say, oh, we're a people, the Jewish people, the way that you sometimes hear organizational leaders or politicians say. It has to be demonstrated. And in one way, it's demonstrated through action in times of crisis. But I saw a few years back when there was the horrible attacks in France, the anti-Semitic attacks in France, and I felt, we're the Jewish people. Where are all the international Jewish leaders from all the communities around the world? Why aren't they going to France right now to show solidarity? Why aren't they supporting the French? Just this sort of disconnect that we felt for so long, that I felt needed to be remedied through the tools that I have at my disposal. So that's apparently, for one thing, that's apparently a message that people value very deeply. The second thing is that alongside what has this moment brought us, alongside the grief and shock and horror and mobilization and fear, it's also a moment of revelation. Every single one of us feels that there are fundamental truths that we held that are not true, that we were wrong about, that whether it's within Israel, there's an endless string of beliefs that we had about our security that aren't true, and who to blame, and all that's going to be dealt with. But in the diaspora as well, the sense that we knew who our friends were, that we knew that we were confident in the role that Israel may have or not have, that we could openly criticize and not realize that on some level perhaps we were signaling a kind of weakness to enemies who were just waiting, that we could teach the Holocaust in Holocaust museums, that without explaining that your neighbors too might have genocidal intentions one day. And these questions are really important to ask, and it's what I call the great rethinking has begun. It's begun in many areas, but we can't only focus on sending, helmets to reservists and supporting, because part of the mobilization is focusing entirely on Israel. The fact of the matter is that Israel welcomes it, and it makes us feel like we're doing something. But there's also things that need to be done in the diaspora itself, to be done differently, to be rethought. And I want that
Tell us
conversation.
about that. Yeah. So let's go there.
Look,
where do you see the diaspora needing to rethink the way it's organized, its assumptions, its priorities? Where are we failing?
I think the most obvious place is in the alliance between many liberal Jews and progressive movements that has just ruptured. And so many people are saying, I thought these people were my allies, and they're supporting the carnage of Hamas, openly supporting it. And that causes them to say, okay, well, what, the course survival theory of North American Jewry has been long built on alliances with other liberal and like-minded and progressive movements. And very often for many years, there's been this sort of sense, especially in the last 10 years, there's been a sense of, wait, we built the LGBTQ plus movement. How come they're being pro-Palestine? All these things appeared that were concerning. And now it's suddenly ripped open. And by the way, there are essays in this book that talk directly about that. There's an essay by David Bernstein called "Who Are the New Cossacks? We Need to Confront Them." And it's referring to how we're always looking for Cossacks in our minds, and maybe we should think that they're on the left no less than on the right. That's in the book. We have an essay by Isabella Tabarovsky, a wonderful scholar whose area of expertise is in the Soviet origins of modern anti-Zionism. And I went to a talk of hers last night at the City University of New York, and she showed a slide of pamphlets in English printed by the Soviet Union and massively disseminated in hundreds of thousands of copies on American campuses in the early 1970s. And each pamphlet has a different message, and they're all the ones we've heard. Israel is apartheid, Zionism is colonialism, and on and on and on and on. And the Soviets built an entire vast machine, and the kids who are reading those pamphlets are now senior faculty at the universities. So there is a lot of, we have to ask ourselves, how do we let this happen? How do we get to a point where we no longer feel, where we feel like we have to come together and circle the wagons? And maybe, and the other thing is that we've allowed partisanship to divide us, political partisanship to divide us, to the point where it's very hard to work together, at least in the United States, what I'm seeing. I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but in the United States, the ferocity of the pro-Trump, what they called the resistance, and then the Republican never-Trumpers, the neocons, whatever you call them, this sort of three camps has also divided the Jews very sharply, and to the point that it's very hard to see us coming together properly. But I think that's beginning to change now, because Jewish unity is now an existential need in a way that it wasn't before.
I might say to you, it's very good that there are Jewish voices inside of these progressive circles and movements and institutions, because the fundamental causes that are being supported are just, and it's our voices that can be raised when those when these fundamental causes are sort of compared to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and in unfair ways. Without our presence there, we wouldn't be able to raise our voices adequately.
Well,
you think that's
my immediate response is, how's that working out?
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that very, very good and well-meaning organizations are founded and built very often with Jewish involvement, and that at a certain point, for reasons that I think really need to be carefully studied, they get hijacked by people who don't really believe in the founding principles of the organization and who really just see this as another tool for advancing other causes. And when that happens, there's nothing to do there. You're only lending them legitimacy that they don't deserve to have, and they need to be fought. So I get the question. I understand why that comes up, but at a certain point, you have to say, I'm giving them exactly the legitimacy they crave for, where their real goals become revealed at a moment like this. There is no negotiating, there is no working with somebody who wants to see both sides of the Hamas attack. Okay, who thinks that it's simply no. We have to just say we're done with that. We're done. We have to have the self-confidence and the dignity, the self-respect to say, those people, we're done apologizing for who we are. We're done being scared. We're done hiding from, our feelings and thoughts in the face of these people. These people are a threat, not just to the Jews. These people are a threat to all liberal society. And our job now is to identify that threat, to help America and Canada recognize that the Jews are always, I don't want to say the canary in the coal mine, because I think it's a terrible analogy, but where Jews cannot be safe, nobody can be safe. Where Jews cannot be free, nobody can be free. And if history teaches anything, it's that the message of the Jews to the world are, let us be, and you will prosper. Kill us, and you will fail, even if you succeed in killing us. And well-meaning, dedicated people who believe in liberal democracy, whether in the United States or Canada, who are not Jewish, need to wake up and say, okay, this is a battle, this is an existential threat to democracy itself, to the nation itself, not just to its Jews.
So something I've been wondering about is whether this ideology is just plain and simple anti-Semitism. That's what the root of this ideology is, or whether it's something else, whether it's this victimhood obsession and people's inability to pick up a history book, and therefore the quick jumping to a conclusion that the Jews look like the oppressors and the Palestinians look like victims, so we'll take the side of the Palestinians, and therefore it's not really anti-Semitism; it's just stupidity. Where are you on that question?
So I don't accept the anti-Semitism stupidity dichotomy. I think that these things can overlap. I think that anti-Semitism has always changed its form and its excuses over time. I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, I hate Jews. What's a socially acceptable way to describe that? I think that you have a combination of two things right now. You have almost, let's call it a half century or 3/4 of a century old campaign that was actively started by the massive resources of the Soviet Union to paint Israel in all the ways we are seeing it currently painted, and to drill that into generations of elites across Europe and the United States, and to build institutions and structures that have perpetuated themselves long after the Soviet Union is gone. So you have something that's about 60, 70 years old. It really began in earnest after the Six-Day War, combined with something that's thousands of years old, which is anti-Semitism, which is a form of conspiracy theory, right? Conspiracy theory, what we call conspiracy theory, is a very natural human condition. It says all this randomness in this universe must have explanations. All the bad things that are happening, there must be some kind of explanation to it. And if you can point to certain kind of people who have no excuse whatsoever to exist or succeed in in my world, who are on their own, who think themselves superior, who, and so on and so forth, it becomes a very, very natural form of the conspiracy theory that explains everything. But the fact is that it's continued. When we're strong, we're attacked for being strong. When we're weak, we're attacked for being weak. When we're communists or socialists, we're attacked for that. When we're capitalists, we're attacked for that. When we're rich or when we're poor, there is no condition of the Jew in which we are not attacked, except we're dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's so hard to internalize and so hard to accept that every generation forgets it anew. And and we tried so hard through Holocaust education to explain that, but Holocaust education itself became transformed. And instead of teaching Jews about what is the state of the reality of being Jewish in any century, in the world, in history, it became the exact opposite. It became why we need to be tolerant, because the solution to the Holocaust is tolerance.
Right. Much more universalistic.
Exactly. And so I don't know what the solution to it is, but I think that knowing history is crucial. I think remembering is crucial. I think that the most important thing is maintaining what I call the first person plural, right? The we. And this has been missing from so much of Jewish life, the sense that we are a coherent people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's totally legitimate to say, not to say I'm a Jewish person, I'm a Jew. If you've got a problem with that word, it's not my problem, it's yours.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm part of a people. And that's it. And if you can say whatever you want about it, but this is who we are. We're proud of it, and we're going to defend it. So I don't know exactly the answers concretely or specifically, but I know that we've made an awful lot of mistakes and we see now things that we never thought we would see.
So October 7th comes along.
Yeah.
And it is hopefully going to be a wake-up call that will last, hopefully, for years, correct some of the misassumptions and misjudgments that you speak about. And you must be studying very carefully how Jewish organizations in the United States and Canada and elsewhere in the diaspora have responded themselves. So you had thoughts about the media, you had thoughts about the larger civic institutions of American life. I wonder if you have any criticism, or maybe none at all, for the way the organized Jewish community is addressing October 7th, what they're saying, what they're not saying, how they're mobilizing, how they're not mobilizing, how they get it, and how maybe some don't.
Well, it's hard for me to criticize for the same reason that it's hard for me to criticize our prime minister at this moment. Like, we're at war. We know exactly what needs to be investigated, what went down. We will deal with all of it later.
Yeah.
And people who screwed up will pay a price later.
Okay, so don't say who screwed up. Say how they're screwing up, if you want to be nicer.
I think there's a lot of energy and a desire to direct, especially donors' energy, into projects and into solutions that feel helpful, but aren't necessarily, when you're in the middle of a crisis, you do whatever you can, and later you figure out what was useless. Yes. But at the same time, when let's put it this way, there are things that need to be done that between the extremely generous aid packages that are about to come out of Congress, and the fact that Israel is a country now with $140 billion annual budget, and it's not a poor country anymore. There are things that these two governments will pay for that don't necessarily need private Jewish money to pay for. without going into any specific examples.
You're talking about military. Well, what do you mean? Well, I
I,
want
I
you to
am
go into specific examples. You're
I'm
talking
talking about,
about military aid. I mean, listen, I'm a rabbi. I have a discretionary fund.
yeah.
I'm getting requests left and right for help from 100 different causes. So I'm
I
listening very
think
carefully to what you're
I
saying.
I think look, if you want to, I didn't tell you this story, but I have a son who hopped on an ambulance the first day. He's not in the army, so he volunteers for Magen David Adom. He as a medic, he saw all the horror, and he went to visit his brothers and sisters who were in reserve duty, and saw that they were lacking in some of the equipment they could have.
Right.
And he got together with a bunch of friends, and within a week, had created a nonprofit, raised $500,000 to run the nonprofit, got volunteers across the New York area to buy $60 million worth of military grade watches and helmets and water bottles and all sorts of things that could help the reservists. Chartered
Wow.
4 El Al cargo flights, okay, and then it all got stuck in customs, and they had to do an internal bureaucratic battle to get it released from customs so they could actually get to the soldiers, all within a week. It's incredible. It's called soldiersavelives.org, and anybody I have no idea what the Canadian tax status of it is, but a lot of people are donating to it. So there are tremendous things to do, and they're all good. Everything is good, but we need to also invest in our own failings, because it's not just about Israel right now. We, the diaspora, I mean, I say we, I'm Israeli, but we collectively need to also understand that there is a need to mobilize internally, domestically, for what's to come, and to correct flaws and to identify problems. And I've been in books all my life, and for 30 years I've heard people tell me, we don't have time for books because the house is on fire. To which I respond, okay, but the house is always on fire, and all you have is a fire extinguisher, and that's great, but maybe you should install sprinklers.
Mm.
Maybe the house would not so easily catch fire if you were investing in the spirit and character and qualities of your children, and their Jewish
So what you're saying is we're
pride.
sending all of these resources to Israel, and Israel will be fine, and Israel will take care of itself. You are not as certain about Jews in the diaspora.
As crazy as it sounds, I know it sounds preposterous because we've just endured the most horrific moment in our history.
Right.
But the way Israel has experienced it is that for the first 3 days, it was utter horror and madness because we had terrorists running among us, and then they were
Right.
gone. And yes, there is grief and mourning, but at the same time, what we switched into a mode of war, and war we know. And so I do believe Israel in the long run will thrive and succeed, and channel this in. Look, we just saw a year of demonstrations. Many people saw in it, maybe Israel's going to end. And I saw in it the only country on earth where massive demonstrations, both sides are waving the same national flag.
Right.
Okay, that's what I saw. There's a tremendous spirit, and our disunity in the last year was a luxury that came from our belief in our security.
Right.
A false belief, it turned out. And so we've traded in that luxury. We no longer have it. And what we do have instead is unity. And it's just so powerful. And so there is no enemy that is going to stand before this unleashed biblical rage of the Israelis right now. And we all know it, we all believe it, we all feel it totally. So I'm not saying, I don't want anybody to think that this is, oh, like we don't need your, it's not true. Every single thing that you do to help Israel helps Israel. These are really, really helpful
But let's
things.
not forget about the challenges that are here and there and those that will come.
And the time to address those challenges is now.
Okay, so we only
Okay.
have 12 minutes left, so I want to
Okay.
hear about them. You wrote this incredible book about the priorities
Yeah.
of Jewish community. You clearly feel that there are those that need to be addressed urgently. What are they?
I think that
Are you talking about yeshiva day school tuition? Are you talking about the
no, look,
rabbinical schools? Are you talking about
I
UJA?
th- it's a great question. I think that the number one issue is the investment in uh, what we used to call assimilation. Um, the questions of how do we get Jews, young Jews, to feel strong and proud and supported and educated, and to educate themselves and engaged. Questions of understanding what Zionism is. There's an amazing essay in this book, in Jewish Priorities, by Einat Wilf,
Yes,
called
I read it.
Zionism as Therapy,
Yeah.
in which, to understand that Zionism is, in its origins, is just another word for Jewish pride. It was an intellectual movement addressing what ails the diaspora. And she talks about a course she taught at Georgetown, and students were coming up to her and saying, this is worth many hours of therapy, because the issues that were being raised in these century-old Zionist texts were the same ones that these students were dealing with. The questions of unity, cross-communal, cross-denominational working together. I think it's really still problematic that I couldn't get any ultra-Orthodox speakers to speak at the Stryker Center in New York because it's affiliated with Temple Emmanuel. Even now, even in the middle of an emergency, I think that every community needs to ask itself, okay, what have we done to advance cross-communal unifying things so that our kids can see that we're a people? Okay,
So the
and
investments need to be made in Jewish identity building, Jewish pride
yeah,
building.
and look, I think that one of the investments on the educational side, there's a lot that can be done. We have an essay by Laura Shaw Frank about the importance of teaching history in Jewish schools. We have an essay by a huge project by Professor Vardit Ringwald of Brandeis, she's working on the theory that the reason that North American Jews, or especially United States Jews, don't learn Hebrew is not, as commonly believed, because of a lack of demand, but it's actually because of a lack of supply of good teachers.
Right.
And so she's developed an entire new approach to teaching Hebrew as a second language and training teachers through a growing program at Brandeis connected with Middlebury College. So she has an essay in there. And Michael Steinhardt, the philanthropist, has a really interesting essay called a pantheon of Jewish heroes, that in order to bring the concept of Jewish heroism into the conversation, we need to have an institution, a museum that picks 18 historic Jewish heroes from across the ages and develops curricula about them and educates students about the possibilities of Jewish heroism. And one of the questions that came up this morning, I had a call with the AJC, and I said, we need to change our fundamental narrative that we tell about ourselves. Heroism isn't a Zionist Israeli thing, it's a Jewish thing. Mm-hmm. And instead of talking about 2,000 years of persecution and suffering, we should talk about 2,000 years of overcoming and resilience. Mm. Because those are the stories we have to tell ourselves, and it expresses itself in education, in cultural products, books and film, in just the air we breathe and the way we talk about ourselves to ourselves. I remember President Biden used to be Vice President Biden, and when he was Vice President Biden, he gave a talk recognizing American Jewish Heritage Month, and he spoke about the tremendous contribution of American Jews to American society in every discipline, in every field. It's immense, and Jews read that and said, "Wow, we don't ever talk like that."
Right.
We're not in public, maybe in Shoal.
Right.
But yeah, we should be. Listen, why can't our museums in Washington, why does it have to be a universalized Holocaust museum? Why can't it be like the African American Museum, where it's about our story and our pride and our achievements? Yeah, talk about Jewish achievements. Why not? Right? This is generations of being told you have to hide your Jewishness in order to make it in America. Another essay in the book is Omri Caspi, the NBA star, who writes about how his discovery that, he was feeling very detached and very kind of, like a leaf blowing in the wind, he says, when he was in the NBA, until he started keeping kosher and putting on tefillin. And what he discovered was that all the other players respected him more for it. They said, that's
Right.
great, you've got your thing. That makes you, and he said, gave him an anchor that actually made him a better basketball player, to be able to say, this is who I am. I'm proud of it. Anybody else, they know where they can go if they don't like it. And it's just, there's so many different directions that this can be expressed through, but the core mission needs to be, how do we, make our young people especially not feel scared?
Yes.
And then how do we make the people who hate us and threaten us, how do we make them feel scared? Because this is war.
Yeah.
And we won't be safe until it becomes completely unacceptable to say that what Hamas did needs to be understood, given that it didn't happen in a vacuum, or that maybe it's a good thing. I can't even bring myself to describe it, but you've all heard the descriptions. You don't need it. This is a level of barbarism and inhumanity that cannot be justified by anyone, anywhere, ever. And that must be our minimal demand for giving them peace. Mm-hmm. So we're allowed to be angry, and we're allowed to channel that anger into constructive, positive. We're allowed to feel rage. We have every right to right now. And yes, we need to be, when you're waging war, you need to be smart. You can't just go into the street and start burning Palestinian flags.
But what's fascinating about this discussion is that you're saying, let that rage lead you to action on the ground where you are.
Yeah.
We need more than just your checkbooks being sent over to Israel. We need a strong community in the diaspora that's willing to partner with us to fight this fight with us. It's very, very interesting to hear you say that. As a rabbi, it's music to my ears. We've been trumpeting to the larger Jewish organizations and to philanthropists for a very long time that we need Jewish identity building programs. This is where the funding needs to be. And synagogues do more than probably any other institution to on the ground build strong Jewish identity. And yet, then some anti-Semitic attack happens, and we see philanthropy completely be distracted by local issues, and then turn to another anti-Semitism project. And then October the 7th happens, and massive amounts of money being raised that are not going to be locally spent, that are going to get shipped to Israel. There's nothing that inspires the Jewish community, unfortunately, now more than Israel under attack and anti-Semitism. It's just provokes something in the emotions. So could you respond to that for a second? How do you speak, if you're the rabbi of a synagogue, how do you speak to a philanthropist and say, we appreciate the 50 million that you raised, but our synagogues are running deficits and can't put on decent programming in order to build the kind of soldiers, the intellectual soldiers that we need here to fight this war with our brothers and sisters in Israel?
Well, I think that you just now hit upon a great metaphor, which is to understand that you're training soldiers in a 3,000-year-long battle for Jewish survival. And now we've hit a really intense spot in the battle, and we're taking heavy fire, especially in the diaspora.
Right.
And what are they going to do about it? What are they, and I think that you can come up with concrete programs. And you know what? Even self-defense is not a bad part of it if it's only one component of it. I think self-defense is part of it. I think that that there needs to be a much more robust intelligence gathering operation in the diaspora to understand who and where and what is working against us. I think that there need to be certain kind of rapid response teams developed on campuses. You got these, George Washington University? You've got these crazy people projecting pro-Hamas things on the walls of the buildings, right? If you had three kids with drones with cameras on them, you could just zoom in, take a picture of their faces, then project that on the wall.
Right.
right? You know, let's have some transparency. Who are these people? Let the world know. Let future employers know the identities of the people who are attacking and justifying the murders of our children.
Right.
And we have to take off the gloves. Really have to take off the gloves and say we're done. And be creative, and go crazy a little bit. And that requires attention to the local, and that requires attention to training our kids from an early age to be proud and to just not take this from anybody.
Well, I hope our audience is listening. I hope that they are internalizing this message. I think you have articulated for us, even though you're the editor of the book, you've
I think I put
articulated a major Jewish priority.
Thank you, and I think I put
Maybe a synthesized.
in the chat. I think you'll find a link to the Amazon page for for Jewish Priorities if you're interested in purchasing it.
Okay, does everybody see that in the chat? You'll see a link. Otherwise, I don't see it, but we have a different Amazon, David, here in Canada. So
Oh no, I have to find Canadian one.
you have to go to Canadian Amazon and just type in Jewish Priorities, David Hazony, and you will see the book.
.ca.
It's at Indigo too.
Yes, I am. I'm going to find it.
Gail, are you able to look it up on the chat box?
We do have a link on our website.
Found it. I'm going to put it in the chat box right now. Hold on.
Thank you.
I found it. Here we go. Boom. Whoops.
Great.
Boom. Try that.
David, there we go. I see it. David, I hope your family is safe. I hope that
Thank you.
I hope that they are successful in rooting out the evil that we spoke about tonight. Our prayers are, I was going to say with the people of Israel, but I'm going to say with Jewish people everywhere. And I want to thank you for writing this book, for editing this book, for your contributions in many, many different ways to the quality of Jewish life in our day. And wish you only blessings and success in disseminating this. I think everybody who buys a copy will find themselves grateful and connected to what they find inside.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay sane, and stay strong.